from the Center for Partnerships. Thank you. Center for Partnerships and Innovation at NARUC. Thanks for joining us today for a discussion on virtual power plants. This is a topic of really a lot of current interest in the energy industry and in the regulatory community, and one that I'm excited about. So I'm looking forward to the presentations we have today. Very briefly, quick reminder, the Center for Partnerships and Innovation is NARUC's technical assistance group that supports many of you who are here from our membership with a variety of resources and the regulatory community at large. I hope you'll visit our website where you can find an up-to-date version of this fact sheet that I'm showing you here, not for you to read at this point, but to show you the breadth of information that we have available to you. We have our events page, and as you can see, we've got a number of events coming up just in the next couple of weeks. We have a full calendar of opportunities usually throughout the year. We are also coming up on NARUC's Summer Policy Summit in Austin next month. And of note to this audience, there will be a follow-up to what was a very popular add-on event for virtual power plants that we did at our winter meeting back in February. This is again going to be on Wednesday afternoon following the conclusion of the main Summer Policy Summit programming. And we're going to have an interactive and facilitated exercise talking about VPPs, challenges, and solutions. So if you're at all on the fence about thinking about coming to Austin, please check out the description of the workshop and the whole agenda, and think about coming down for the summit and or the workshop. I will post a link. We'll post this link and other links in the chat as we go along here, so you don't have to try to copy them off the screen. There's still a few hotel rooms available as well, so you can get on that quick. Today, our webinar is co-sponsored by our friends at the National Association of State Energy Officials, and in particular, the joint NASIO-NARUC Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings Working Group. And so I'm going to hand it over to Rod Sobin, who directs that group and who is a senior fellow at NASIO, to give you a little bit more information about that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate that. And if we could have the next slide, that would be great. I did want to take a couple of moments to go over the working group. We're very happy to partner with NARUC in a number of areas, including the GEB working group, which focuses on demand flexibility, as well as, of course, on this webinar. The working group is generously supported by the Department of Energy's Building Technologies Office. We are working through the working group, which includes both members from the State Energy Office and PUC communities, to help states explore GEB, Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings and Demand Flexibility, their technologies and applications, to identify the opportunities and impediments, both technical and non-technical, meaning regulatory, policy, market oriented, to help states identify their priorities and interests and inform them in their policies, planning, and regulatory activities. Just want to highlight that, you know, as we've discussed in other forums, the opportunities for grid interactive efficient buildings and demand flexibilities can help reduce costs, enhance resilience, and also reduce emissions, and also provide opportunities to further and improve the integration of distributed resources and renewable resources, both distributed and utility levels. We are working to help answer the questions of how facilities can optimize their interactions with the grid, how states can fashion policies and programs and regulations to advance that, and to help states meet their objectives. We do this through providing for forums and exchanges. We have developed a number of resources, which I'll highlight in a moment or two, and disseminate other resources. And we have been facilitating technical assistance from several of the national laboratories, and we've also provided opportunities for consultations and collaborations. Next, please. Do want to just mention, I think there are now 27 states from both the PUC and SEO communities that participate at varying levels. Our main activity has been forums, approximately bi-monthly, which are open to state members. Recently, we had one on energy efficiency and demand flexibility potential at the state level for certain types of buildings. We've had discussions of performance-based regulation and its relationship to demand flexibility. We had a forum focused on cybersecurity matters with respect to DERs and demand flexibility. And we've had discussions of distribution planning, including non-wires solutions or non-wires alternatives. Our next forum will be on July 26th, and will be focused on the Department of Energy's Connected Communities projects, including an overview and presentations from 2 of the projects that are underway. The pictures below, which are probably legible to you, highlight a number of our resources available on our website, including a demand flexibility GEB 101 document, a state briefing paper, and some papers on how one can include demand flexibility in some traditionally energy efficiency oriented policies and programs, such as building benchmarking, building performance standards, codes, appliance standards, even zoning and land use policies. And also one on demand flexibility in building operations and use of such mechanisms as performance contracting and energy as a service. And again, we're very happy to collaborate with NARUC on this, and I'll hand it back to Jeff. Thank you. And you need to unmute yourself, Jeff.
Of course I
I've
do.
done that many a time.
So many times. Thanks, Rod. And thanks for your really great leadership on the working group. It produces a lot of excellent material. So the Financial Toolbox series that this is part of examines regulatory issues where, quote, technology meets bookkeeping. There's a lot of new technologies. There's a lot of potential investments out there for utilities and regulated utilities to make. These toolboxes explore both the technologies and the types of financial tools that utility regulators can use to support their integration. So again, it's helpful to start with an understanding of what the technology is. And so today we're going to hear some great presentations, not only about what a virtual power plant is, but how it has been implemented, some of the ideas for implementation, examples, and then also our panelists will touch on some of the regulatory issues. We've done a number of these over the past, and you can find more of them on other topics and other technologies on CPI's website in the valuation and rate making section, and we'll put a link in that. So final details. We'll do Q&A at the end of the 3 presentations. Please use the Q&A feature to submit those, not the chat. Let's only do chat if there's a technical issue that you need to notify us about. And we'll be monitoring the Q&A, and Commissioner Fraser will moderate that at the end. As you heard, if you were here right up front, the webinar is being recorded and it will be available for review on our website, along with all of the financial toolboxes. The presentations will also be available, and I'll try to put a link up here in case you want to download them during the presentation. And last, the other aspect of the Financial Toolbox series is that there will be a summary briefing, and that will also be posted. That will capture the discussion today and add some other supporting information. So we hope you'll look for that. So I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce the Honorable Cecile Fraser, Commissioner from the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. She has been a commissioner since June 2017, and I've had the pleasure of seeing her moderate other panels, both in person and online. And we're really thrilled that she agreed to tackle this topic with us today. Before her appointment to the commission, she served with the DPU as counsel in the Division of Regional and Federal Affairs and Consumer Division. So she is certainly well-versed in a variety of issues that face the commissioners. She's an attorney with over a decade experience in energy and utilities. She will introduce our panelists. So Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Let me start with the usual disclaimer that nothing I say while moderating this panel reflects the views of the Massachusetts Commission or the DPU. We have a terrific panel lined up to help us learn about virtual power plants, the role they can play, the benefits they can provide, and issues for regulators to think through if virtual power plants are being deployed. So let me introduce our panelists so we can dive right in. First, we have Ryan Hledik. Ryan is a principal of the Brattle Group. His consulting practice is focused on regulatory strategy and planning matters related to emerging energy technologies and policies. He's the author of a new study on the benefits of virtual power plants. Our second panelist is Brenda Chu. Brenda is the Director of Product Management at Virtual Peaker, where she focuses on advancing the company's virtual power plant products. Prior to Virtual Peaker, Brenda led the research team at the Smart Electric Power Alliance and spearheaded multiple research efforts focused on enabling demand flexibility, evolving utility programs, and integrated distribution planning. Our third finalist is Franco Albi. Franco is the Director of Regional Integration at Portland General Electric. His team is responsible for accelerating PGE's participation in power markets and enhancing operational capabilities to increase the use of clean energy. So let me turn it over to Ryan to kick us off.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner Fraser, for that introduction. And I'm very excited to be here with everyone today. The study that we conducted for Google that I'm going to be sharing with you, we really conducted this with a regulatory and state policy making audience in mind. So very appreciative of NARUC and NASIO for giving me the opportunity to share some of the insights and findings from our study with you. So I'll jump straight into it. Let's see here. Okay. So since I'm the first speaker, I'm the one who gets to attempt to define virtual power plants for this audience. The definition that we used in our study is that a virtual power plant is a portfolio of distributed energy resources that are actively controlled to provide benefits to the power system, to consumers, and to the environment. And so the box that you're seeing, the green box that you're seeing on this screen, is just an example of some of the types of elements that could make up a virtual power plant. We're listing smart thermostats, managed charging of electric vehicles, smart water heaters, rooftop solar, distributed batteries, and commercial building automation systems. And since we've published this study, one of the questions I've gotten about our definition of a virtual power plant is, should it also include energy efficiency, or should it also include behavioral forms of demand response that are induced through rate designs or other incentives? And my response to that is great comment, and it should. I personally think that we should be as comprehensive as we can be when we think about our definition of virtual power plants, and not exclude certain demand side resources, because the reality is, from one market to the next, different elements or components of a virtual power plant are going to have more value depending on the specific conditions of that market. So I think a broad definition and consideration of virtual power plants is an important starting point. So just to give a quick sense of how virtual power plants work. So the various distributed energy resources that we're showing this slide would be controlled by a utility or an aggregator. With that control, the utility or the aggregator would manage those distributed energy resources in a coordinated way through software to provide benefits to the power grid and to the power system, the distribution system, the transmission system, and the bulk generation system as well. by managing those distributed energy resources in an orchestrated way, overall power system costs can be reduced and emissions can be reduced as well. And then ultimately, those benefits would be shared between the consumer, the utility, and the entity that's controlling the load, as well as non-participants as well. So this is very much a system that starts and ends with the customer, but also involves participation by a utility, an aggregator, and obviously a lot of interaction with the power system as well. So I'm sure we'll get more in the Q&A session, get more into kind of what a VPP is and how it works. We are really right now at an inflection point when it comes to thinking about VPP deployment and adoption. I think this is the perfect time for us to be having this conversation, because there are a number of drivers that are going to lead to a significant increase in consumer adoption of distributed energy resources over the next few years. The costs of distributed energy resources, such as smart thermostats or rooftop solar, have come down significantly recently and are forecasted to continue to decline in the future. Technology is advancing as well, particularly quickly in the space related to the software that is needed to manage all of these distributed energy resources in a coordinated, orchestrated way. The Inflation Reduction Act, as I'm sure you know, includes provisions that will reduce the cost of energy efficiency and electrification. FERC Order 2222 is designed to remove barriers to all of these various distributed energy resources participating in wholesale energy markets. Model availability of electric vehicles, smart thermostats, and other distributed energy technologies is growing pretty quickly and is expected to continue to increase in the future. And then lastly, the decarbonization imperative that is driving so much activity in the industry today is a major force that is leading us to think more carefully and more thoroughly about the potential role that distributed energy resources can play in helping us manage and reduce the cost of the decarbonization transition. So all those factors are combining to lead to what we expect to be pretty rapid growth in the adoption of DERs. What I'm showing on the right-hand side of this slide is just a compilation of various analyst forecasts around the increase in adoption of various distributed energy resources. And basically, for the most part, what we're seeing is, depending on the DER that you're looking at or the forecast that we're reviewing, the increase in adoption of these DERs could be anywhere between 3 times to 10 times current levels by 2030 in just the next few years. So this is a pretty dramatic increase that we're going to see and really will dramatically increase the base of eligible customers who could participate in a virtual power plant program. So one more slide on background. $120 billion has been spent on resource adequacy in the US over the past 10 years. That's about 110 gigawatts of battery and gas capacity that has been added, primarily for the purposes of providing resource adequacy and reliability to the US power system. That's a historical statistic, but our expectation is that need for new capacity and new resource adequacy is going to persist into the future. And that's going to be driven by several factors, including peak demand growth related to electrification initiatives, the retirement of coal plants, capacity which will need to be replaced, and our growing dependence on renewable generation, which is a great carbon-free source of energy, but doesn't provide a lot in terms of capacity when capacity is needed. So we see, when we look out at the next decade or so, we see there being a continued significant need for capacity. And the questions that we tried to answer with our study are, in addition or as an alternative to the gas peakers and the utility scale batteries that have been added to the system for this purpose historically, instead, can virtual power plants serve that same need? And if they can do that reliably, the second question that our study looks into is, how do they compare economically with those other conventional alternatives, the gas peakers and the batteries? Can VPPs provide that same resource adequacy benefit at a lower cost? So those are the two questions that we set out to answer in this study. And to address that first question around whether virtual power plants can provide resource adequacy, basically the way we approached our analysis is we defined a utility, a mid-sized utility composed of about 1.7 million customers, and assumed that this utility would need 400 megawatts of new resource adequacy or new capacity between now and 2030. And we conducted hourly reliability modeling to determine whether a virtual power plant would be available to meet that utility's resource adequacy needs in all of the hours that would be driving potential reliability concerns across the utility system. So the VPP that we modeled was, for the purposes of our study, was composed of 4 specific technologies, all of which are commercially available demand flexibility technologies that are available to residential households today. So the first technology was behind the meter battery, which we're seeing residential customers adopting for resilience and other purposes. Managed electric vehicle charging at the home. Smart or grid interactive electric resistance water heaters, and smart thermostats, which could provide both reductions in heating and cooling demand, as well as an energy efficiency benefit through automated and remote programming. So we constructed a VPP that was composed of those 4 resources, and on an hourly basis, analyzed the availability of those resources subject to specific constraints around customer willingness to have their load curtailed, and assumptions around likely enrollment in these programs. So our analysis was not a technical potential study. It was very much constrained by what we've observed through actual utility programs as customer willingness to participate and respond to the types of incentives that would exist for a VPP. So we did our modeling for all 8,760 hours of the year. And what you're seeing in the chart on this slide is the result of our modeling on the peak demand day for our illustrative utility. The solid blue line is showing you what the utility's 24-hour demand profile would look like before the VPP was utilized. And then the dashed orange line is showing you what the utility's load profile would look like after the VPP was dispatched. The shaded sections between the two lines is showing you how each of the 4 technologies in the VPP was utilized. And what you can see is during the utility's evening peak demand hours, the VPP was able to reduce demand in any hour that was contributing to the overall system peak. So the VPP effectively reduced peak demand by 400 megawatts on this day. And then if you look at the lower part of the chart in the middle of the day, what you can see is that there's some load building in the middle of the day when there were potentially, for example, solar curtailments or lower priced hours. So the VPP not only curtailed load in the evening, it also shifted load to lower priced hours of the system. The way we define this utility was a utility that by 2030 would have half of its load served by solar and wind generation. And what that really led to was some potentially very challenging conditions for the VPP to operate in. And what we found was, in order to provide the 400 megawatts of resource adequacy to this system, the VPP ended up reducing demand in both the summer and the winter, spanning 7 different months of the year, reducing demand during 63 hours of the year. And on the peak day that we're looking at here, the VPP was actually able to reduce demand for 7 consecutive hours of the day. So that's a really interesting takeaway when you think about the fact that the VPP was able to achieve those types of impacts while also accounting for very significant behavioral constraints around customer willingness to tolerate interruptions of their service. So that portion of the analysis addressed the question of whether VPPs can reliably provide capacity to the system. The answer to that was yes. And then the next question we set out to answer was to understand how the economics of doing that with a VPP compared to the economics of providing the same amount of capacity from a gas peaker or a battery. So what we're showing on this slide is first the economics of providing 400 megawatts of resource adequacy from a gas peaker. And what you're seeing in the dark blue bar on the left is the annualized cost of providing 400 megawatts of gas peaking capacity. So it's about $70 million per year. But in addition to the capacity benefit that gas peaker is providing to the system, the gas peaker also provides energy value. When you build a new efficient gas peaker, it's able to run during certain hours of the year and displace older, more expensive units that otherwise would be running. So there is an energy and ancillary services benefit associated with getting that energy from the more efficient, newer gas peaking unit. Once you subtract those energy and ancillary services benefits from the cost of the peaker, you're left with a net cost of about $43 million per year of providing the 400 megawatts of resource adequacy. So those are the economics of the gas peaker. Then we looked at the same economics, but for deploying 400 megawatts of resource adequacy from utility scale batteries. Here you can see that those costs of installing the batteries and running the batteries are a little bit higher than the gas peaker, but the benefits in terms of energy and ancillary services are larger than of a gas peaker as well, because the economics of the utility scale battery allow it to run on something closer to a daily basis, whereas the gas peaker is used more sparingly. So in the case of the case of the utility scale battery, the economics are more attractive than the gas peaker, given our assumptions for this analysis, and we're left with a net cost of about $29 million per year. Then comes the story for the virtual power plant. Here, there are a couple key takeaways. The first is the bar on the left, the costs, is lower than that of the gas peaker or the utility scale battery. As opposed to representing the CapEx associated with building the virtual power plant, instead, these costs represent the costs associated with administering the virtual power plant program, deploying the software that's necessary to manage all of the DERs in an orchestrated way, and then also the incentive costs associated with paying customers to enroll and participate in the program. So aside from those lower upfront costs, what we can also see is there are a number of benefits that are provided by the VPP that aren't provided by the gas peaker or the utility scale battery. And these are really derived from the fact that the VPP is a distributed resource that's located closer to the customer and therefore able to provide benefits to the system that you can't get from a resource that's connected to the transmission system. So just to quickly step through those benefits, the VPP, as we modeled it, could be deployed in a way that would reduce peak demand and therefore reduce investment in both the transmission and the distribution system. The VPP, the battery portion of the VPP, can provide resilience benefits by serving as a source of backup generation to customers that are enrolled. And then lastly, the VPP could provide a benefit in terms of an overall emissions reduction. And this comes primarily from the energy efficiency benefit associated with the smart thermostats. Once you add up all of those benefits, including the societal emissions benefit associated with the VPP, we're left with a net annual cost of only $2 million per year to provide 400 megawatts of resource adequacy. So it's a pretty impressively low number relative to the net cost associated with the gas peaker or the utility scale battery. So that's the kind of the story of the economics from the perspective of one mid-sized utility. We also just wanted to take this result and at a high level extrapolate that to the national level to try and put some of these numbers in context. So we noted that Rocky Mountain Institute recently released an estimate that there is about 60 gigawatts of VPP potential nationally by 2030. And if we just extrapolate the results that you're seeing on this slide to that level of deployment, what we've estimated is that VPPs could save between $15 and $35 billion in resource costs relative to the gas peaker or the utility scale battery over 10 years. And that's just if we focus on the types of costs that would be included, for example, in a utility rate case: transmission costs, distribution capacity, ancillary services, and energy. If we additionally include the societal benefits associated with avoided emissions, what we see is there's an additional $20 billion of benefit associated with those externalities or those societal benefits. So it's a pretty impressive picture in terms of the economics. I do want to note that this is a result that can vary pretty significantly from one market to the next. So we did want to conduct some sensitivity analysis to understand how robust that base case analysis was. So we ran, I think, around a dozen different sensitivity cases related to market conditions and technology costs and power grid costs, just to provide a sense of kind of the sensitivity of this finding to those assumptions. So what you're seeing on this chart is the same net cost bars that I was showing on the previous slide. And then the teal line is highlighting kind of the highest and lowest net cost result coming from those sensitivity cases. So there are a couple pretty interesting things that we want to highlight here. The first is that the economic competitiveness of battery storage and VPPs will vary across markets and depends on in particular on what we've assumed about the trajectory of future cost declines in these technologies. So there are conditions under which those utility scale batteries are competitive with VPPs from the standpoint of the economics of providing resource adequacy. And that's something that needs to be determined through market specific analysis. The other takeaway here is that the bottom end of the VPP range is actually negative, which means that particularly in markets that have higher cost of transmission and distribution or higher costs associated with greenhouse gas emissions, the benefits of VPP can actually outweigh its costs before we even consider the fact that this is providing a very valuable service in the form of resource adequacy. So what that technically means is you could actually get resource adequacy from a VPP at a negative cost to society, which is a pretty dramatic outcome of our study. So there are also several benefits that of VPPs that we haven't quantified here. I won't spend time talking about all of these just in the interest of time, but there are two that I want to highlight that I think are particularly relevant. The first is, NERC put out a study recently highlighting that there is going to be pretty significant need for capacity, an urgent need for capacity across large portions of the US in the very near term to avoid the risk of supply shortages. So we have an urgent need for capacity across major portions of the country, but a lot of the resources that potentially can address that need are stuck in interconnection queues and delays associated with getting those resources connected to the transmission system. Virtual power plants don't face that same constraint. Essentially, you can build a virtual power plant about as quickly as you can enroll customers in these types of programs. So that's potentially huge benefit given some of the concerns that we have about the pace of supply in keeping up with some concerns related to peak demand growth. The other benefit that I want to mention is VPPs can be scaled flexibly. When you're making a decision to invest in, say, a gas peaker, that's a 20, 30, 40-year decision that you're making once the steel is in the ground. That power plant is built, and it's going to be online for the next several decades. Virtual power plants can be scaled. You can ramp up enrollment in a virtual power plant when capacity is needed. If ultimately it turns out that you've overestimated your need for capacity, the capacity of that virtual power plant can be ramped down through reductions in participation incentives. That dynamic needs to be managed carefully so that customers aren't experiencing whiplash, but VPPs give you that year-to-year flexibility and scale that you just don't get from basic investments in infrastructure. So those are just two additional kind of hard to quantify benefits of VPPs that we wanted to acknowledge. And there are several other examples in our final report as well. So, talked a lot about the obvious benefits of VPPs. Also want to spend a few minutes, given the audience, talking about what we view as being the ideal conditions for VPP deployment and really making this happen, because there are barriers today that exist that are preventing VPPs from being deployed at the type of scale that we've mentioned in our study. So we view there as being kind of four key areas where progress will need to be made: market design, technology innovation, policy support, and then supporting regulatory frameworks. On the market design side, we need wholesale markets to provide a level playing field for demand-side resources. FERC Order 2222 is designed with that in mind. We also need retail rates and programs that will incentivize participation in VPPs in innovative, customer-centric ways. And I'm hoping we'll get back to this in some of the Q&A discussion, but one example of that I really like is the idea of subscription pricing, which is designed to give customers some benefits and attract customers to participating in virtual power plant programs in a way that doesn't exist with more conventional rate-making approaches. On the technology innovation side, ultimately DERs will need to be widely available and affordable to customers for virtual power plant potential to be significant. And an often underappreciated aspect of this is those DERs will need to be able to communicate with each other and with the power system in a seamless way. I think when we approach this kind of at a high level from a regulatory or policymaking perspective, we often don't have to grapple with kind of some of the nitty-gritty challenges associated with those communications barriers and those protocols. But that is a key barrier that needs to be addressed and removed in order for virtual power plants to work in an open and seamless manner. We also need algorithms that can effectively optimize the use of DERs while maintaining customer comfort and convenience. There are companies that are actively working on this today, because it's a much more complex situation than just pressing a button and having a power plant generate electricity, right? We need to account for the fact that there's a customer at the other end of the system, and that customer needs to maintain a certain level of comfort and service, or else they'll drop out of the program. And so these algorithms are taking into account a lot of those behavioral considerations. Policy support will help to facilitate VPP deployment as well. Codes and standards can promote the deployment of flexible end uses, building codes, appliance standards. And R&D funding can support the removal of key technical barriers as well. And we've seen, for example, that at DOE, the Loan Programs Office is very actively engaged in finding ways to promote the commercial availability of VPPs as well. Lastly, the regulatory framework. This is an issue that is probably known to many of you, but we do need a utility business model that incentivizes the deployment of VPPs where they're cost effective. Today, most utilities' business model incentivizes the deployment of infrastructure and capital investment in that infrastructure, because that's where utilities earn their return. Utilities don't have that same financial incentive to go out and spend money on operational expenses to deploy VPPs. So overcoming that barrier, that misalignment between the utilities' financial incentive and the deployment of VPPs, in my view, is one of the most important areas where we need to make progress. And then lastly, and related to that, from a resource planning perspective, ultimately we need resource planning and cost effectiveness evaluations of VPPs to account for the full value of these resources. And that's often a case when we look at kind of individual state level frameworks for evaluating the cost effectiveness of VPPs. I think we often run into a situation where we see them only a portion of that total value stack being included in the analysis. So that's a lot, and we didn't want our report to end with something that feels almost insurmountable in terms of kind of the types of issues that we need to tackle. So our report concludes with 3 specific actions that we consider to be low-risk actions that utilities and regulators can take today to start making progress in virtual power plant deployment. In our view, this starts with a jurisdiction-specific assessment of VPP market potential. Every market's different. Every market's customers and costs are different. So understanding for any given utility system or any state where the low-hanging fruit is from a VPP procurement standpoint is just important as a screening exercise to make sure that we know where to dedicate our resources. At that point, establishing a VPP pilot that proves that this is a resource that's dependable in an empirical sense is an important step in the process. And our recommendation is not just to stop with proving that the technology works, but also to use that pilot as an opportunity to test innovative ideas around improving that utility business model and aligning their incentives with the deployment of VPPs. And then lastly, to the point that I made earlier, just reviewing and updating existing policies on valuing VPPs at the state level, we view as an important fundamental element that would connect all of this together. So the study is available on our website. The link is shown on this slide. Definitely encourage you all to check it out. And with that, I will stop. Looking forward to speaking with everyone on the Q&A session. And Commissioner Fraser, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Ryan. That was very informative. Thank you so much for setting the stage and providing us with those 3 low-risk action items for us to consider. That was terrific. So Brenda, we're going to turn things over to you.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I had to find my window here. All right, thank you so much, Commissioner Fraser. A little bit of context too. So I did come from the research background, focusing on demand flexibility and green earth efficient buildings. And I spent a lot of time, similar to Ryan, kind of writing these industry reports, talking about the potential of demand response and DERs. And I've been at Virtual Peaker for about a year now, and it's been a really exciting opportunity to kind of peel back the curtain and take an opportunity to look at what is technology able to do today, what's in the realm of possibility into the future, and really thinking about virtual power plants. So to give a little bit of context on Virtual Peaker as a company, the organization was founded in 2014. Our CEO and founder, Bill Burke, he is headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky, and he really started the organization with the vision of making demand as controllable as a gas turbine generator. So the virtual power plant was part of the vision from the very get-go, but I think many of us understand and know back in 2014, not a lot of utilities, the industry itself was not quite ready for full-on virtual power plants. So the company really started to approach folks with entry-level demand response, and to this day, the vision still stands to follow to try to enable demand to be as controllable as that gas turbine generator. So we are a software as a service platform. We're a software company, and there's a lot of folks that talk about virtual power plants, and when I was in the research realm, it was hard to differentiate and understand what are all these different types of companies, what exactly are they doing, and I will talk a little bit more about that and trying to dissect virtual power plants, different models, and then kind of what Virtual Peaker as an example, where they kind of fit within that ecosystem. But we don't do the program management, we're not implementing, we are purely the technology trying to enable all the capabilities for virtual power plants. So Virtual Peaker is part of the RMI's VP3 initiative. We were founding members there. And through that stakeholder effort, they were able to define 2 clear business model buckets. And Ryan alluded to that earlier in his introduction about how these can be set up. So the first business model is the market participant virtual power plant. And so that typically is more around, it's a third-party aggregator, oftentimes working directly with the wholesale energy markets. Maybe that market operator, they're sending a price signal for capacity, energy, ancillary services, for example. That aggregator is responsible for getting the customers to sign up, engaging with them, dispatching, aggregating those devices, reporting on it, and also incentivizing and paying and communicating and ensuring that those customers are having a good experience. And the wholesale market operator is the one that's paying the aggregator for those services. So the market participant VPP is that third-party wholesale market business model. And an example of the market participant VPP is an OhmConnect, Voltus, Octopus Energy. There are a number of different participants out in the market today that is their business model, and that's how they are approaching it. Versus the virtual power plant for utilities, that business model is a retail VPP. So usually this is utility branded. Perhaps a utility is working with a third-party service provider that's helping them with that program management. But the utility, they are the ones that are enrolling the customers. They're dispatching those devices. They're communicating with them. And they may be trying to meet different system needs. So it could be for resource adequacy or for deferring or avoiding T&D upgrades, trying to meet different carbon emission target requirements. And that utility is then responsible or working with that third-party service provider to communicate with those customers, give them those sign-up bonuses, incentives, payments, and kind of make it all work together. And Portland General Electric is one of those examples, but I don't want to steal Franco's thunder. So one of the examples that we work with Portland General Electric, but we're also working with folks like Green Mountain Power, who've been using our platform since close to inception. They helped incubate the company, and they have programs such as their Bring Your Own Device program. And they have batteries, EV chargers, water heaters, thermostats, a whole range of different DER devices. The batteries predominantly are really the heart of a lot of that VPP program. And they were able to defer or actually retire 2 diesel generators that were equivalent of about 5 megawatts of capacity. And the VPP with their Bring Your Own Device program was attributed to be a large part of why they could actually retire those assets. So I know that Green Mountain Power, from a regulatory perspective, they were able to rate base those customer assets that were on customer premises, but it's an example today of the retail VPP model and how that can work in the wild. But underpinning these 2 business models, you have the market participant virtual power plant, and you also have the retail VPP. And the way that we kind of think of ourselves is the operating model that can underpin those 2 business models. So it's pretty agnostic to the business model itself, but really thinking about what are those operational characteristics that are available. So one of the main characteristics is knitting together heterogeneous assets. So you have, in our platform, you can manage and control and dispatch those batteries, the EV chargers, communicate directly with EVs via telematics. We have V2G capabilities, work with those water heaters, or circuit breakers, and the energy industry is really innovating quickly, and we can always add in new devices, adjust to different capabilities, and really the special sauce is being able to connect those APIs, keep and maintain all these different device types and their different OEMs with varying capabilities and help normalize and make that as simple as possible across the system. And that's really kind of the heart and the foundation of being able to do so. I know there were some questions earlier within the chat talking about APIs, and we have a whole team that focuses purely on just integrating and maintaining those connections with those different devices. And it is a lot of work, and it is onerous work. And it would be very hard to build that from scratch. And we do have open source code for how we do those integrations to try to help also newer entrants to help standardize and make that faster. But a large part of it is that there are a lot of functional requirements we're trying to achieve to enable virtual power plant capabilities. And sometimes the industry doesn't have that information out in the open that can meet the needs. And that is a large part of what virtual peaker software does. And like I was mentioning earlier, so our founder had the original intention for this company to help make demand as controllable as a gas turbine generator. And that really is our goal with the operating capabilities of the platform as we're trying to enable more advanced VPP capabilities. And so how do you do that? There are a couple different ways that we think about it. So one aspect is understanding future possible reductions. So how can we help make that as easy as possible for, if it's a utility or a third-party aggregator or whoever is in the platform, in the system, trying to look at the thousands, hundreds of thousands of DERs that they have connected, what can they get out of those resources? And there's different kind of fuel constraints that you have to consider. It's very different when you have one tangible power plant that a grid operator can look at and say, okay, I know it's there. I know it's running like this. If I press the button, if I need it, I can have X amount. And that's oftentimes a lot of the challenge and the obstacles to gaining the trust with other groups within utilities and starting to go towards that operations and planning side is how can you give me some more certainty of what I can get out of these resources, out of DERs? How can you plan that? And there's infinite kind of possibilities of how to compute it. But the way that we think of the technical virtual power plant is being able to provide more clarity and certainty of what top line number you could get out of this large ecosystem of DERs, and being able to configure what parameters, I want these batteries in this area, how much capacity and how much energy could I get for Thursday's peak event. And so you have to kind of consider all those different fuel constraints. How can you know, okay, this neighborhood is going to be able to provide me 5 megawatts for 2 hours. And if I call on it, then you can also think about how could I actually optimize that block of capacity at the time I need it the most and optimize it. So these are the aspects of the platform and the characteristics of an operational technical virtual power plant that we see underpinning those different business models and enabling more advanced capabilities into the future. And that's the view of the utility or the operator within the system looking at those assets. But of course, these are often resources that are at the customer premise. And so how can you also be automating or making it easy as possible to communicate, maybe automate triggers and ways to engage those customers and give them feedback and keep them excited about what they're doing, how they're supporting the environment, or how much they've saved, and also just feel more empowered with the DERs that have on site. And so that's this other component that's part of the software as well, is how to optimize and communicate with those customers, and also take that data and have more certainty on how they're going to behave, how to optimize for their preferences, and keep the customer experience first at the forefront of how you're operating programs or operating these fleets of DER resources for a virtual power plant. So I've kind of talked about the operational aspects of it and some examples of how it's operated so far, but I think that you could argue that today we have virtual power plants. You can press that button and kind of hope, that you're going to get a certain amount. But I think that going into the future, what are these new capabilities, and also how can we unlock more of this value and just kind of get past some of these different challenges? And Ryan went through some of these already. One aspect that is really the goal is thinking about how we can bridge the gap between customer programs and the more operations and planning side at utilities. So right now, a lot of our clients really fall more from the customer programmatic side. I think Franco is an example. I've talked with a lot of folks at Portland General Electric, and we've been trying to figure out how we can help support more operations planning end, but met him more recently. It's really, really, really nice to meet you, talking about virtual power plants. But yeah, how can we think about it from a distribution planning side? How can we support DERs and enabling and managing those constraints. If you have a neighborhood that is going to all adopt Teslas overnight and that transformer is going to overload, and you can't predict that, how could we better leverage existing customer programs, existing DERs to help manage some of those different constraints? Another aspect that we really want to think about too is ensuring an equitable transition for all. So when we're thinking about this too, back when I was doing more research, I think there was a utility that talked about how demand flexibility, demand response programs can kind of be a bit tone deaf. And I think that was really valid and true, that a lot of these programs can't have trouble reaching, is not accessible to all. It's usually those that are more privileged and have the space and availability to adopt those technologies and engage in those programs. And so that is a barrier and a challenge that we try to consider, or thinking about how some of these programs can better support constraint management, support resource adequacy, and help defer those different infrastructure upgrades and ways to just reduce the cost for all, so that those that are non-participants are also benefiting from those programs. And the other aspect is talking about how to unlock more quantifiable value. And when we're thinking about cost effectiveness, virtual power plants and the ways that we've been looking at demand response programs so far has been kind of, you have these qualitative benefits, you have these quantitative benefits, and how can we start to reach more into the areas of carbon emissions and capturing the benefits there? How can we better capture the benefits to the customer and how this benefits them and their experience, as well as some of these other pieces. And the last piece is how to enable a culture of innovation in the industry. So I think one of the big challenges that we have is what folks talk about is kind of the pilot purgatory, or how to keep up to speed with technology innovation of those different cycles. And that is also another area that we've been trying to think about too, from a technology perspective. And I think with that, I will hand it back to you, Commissioner Fraser.
Thank you, Brenda. It was really helpful to understand the models and the technology and the operational aspects sort of underpinning VPPs, and I appreciated the customer focus, because the customers are so central to this. And thank you also for touching on the equitable transition. I know that's top of mind for a lot of regulators. So we're going to turn it over now to Franco. Franco, you're up.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Fraser, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to speak with you guys. It's great to have the privilege of your time, and I'm just kind of looking at the list of attendees, some former colleagues of mine, not in the room together, but great to be seeing you online again. Really looking forward to building on the insights from Ryan and Brenda. On the next 10, 15 minutes or so, I'll share how we at Portland General Electric are really scaling our virtual power plant to meet and exceed customers' expectations for that increasingly clean energy, and how we're doing so without compromising reliability and while keeping costs as low as possible. Now, our market, our customers, our regulatory environment really strongly inform our strategy and our execution. So I'm going to start by briefly talking about the regional context for PGE, and then about our virtual power plant specifically, the current state, and what we see as the future of our VPP. And it really is truly an exciting part of the clean energy solution. I think when we talk about virtual power plants as an alternative, it's another tool in the toolbox. It's not a replacement for everything, but it is a big part and a key part of that future solution. So when we look at PGE, we're a vertically integrated investor-owned utility with a service territory that's wholly located in Oregon. You know, Ryan alluded to different markets have different conditions, and we're no exception to that comment. We provide power through just under 1 million service points, which represents approximately 1.9 million customers. And I make that distinction between meters and customers because we really want to reflect our customers' diverse values. We have, large semiconductor manufacturing and a huge digital presence. We have very progressive and environmentally focused communities. And we have families and individuals that we also serve, and they're really relying on us to power their lives. And it's our duty as an essential service provider to make sure that we're meeting all customers' needs safely, reliably, and efficiently. Our system average load kind of fluctuates between 2 and 3.5 gigawatts, give you a sense of relative size. Our all-time peak load is around 4.4 gigawatts, 4.5 gigawatts. And we have about 3.3 gigawatts of self-generation, which, along with partnerships with third-party energy suppliers and our own market participation, really helps us deliver customers with the continuous energy needs and the increasingly dynamic energy supply that we have. Also in Oregon, we have very ambitious clean energy goals. We've been leading the way in the adoption and integration of clean energy resources for a long time. Our system, in fact, was founded on clean hydropower, and we've been integrating wind and solar for over 2 decades. Most recently, we've secured about 475 megawatts of battery storage that's going to come online in the next 2 years. And it's really these proactive efforts and our portfolio being almost 40% non-emitting that give us a foundation to make continuous progress and reduce our emissions towards that 100% clean energy goal in 2040. A little bit more on the regional context. You know, the energy markets in the West really shape a dynamic and complex landscape. It's not a fully integrated market like MISO or PJM, but there is ongoing evolution to maximize the utilization of all the resources, both transmission system and generation alike. And ensuring resource adequacy is one of the core tenets of all of our efforts. If we're going to hit that 100% clean energy future, we really have to maintain the customer confidence in their power supply. If you're living in Texas, you know, 115 heat index, really concerned about their power going out. Confidence around customers is it's paramount. The biggest way to reduce the acceleration that we have towards clean energy is to not be able to deliver it in a consistent basis. In addition to the diversity in resources and market dynamics, we also have a diversity in policy and regulation. And here you can see we have the common goal of increasing the use of clean energy. And it's a simple goal to say, but the complexity of implementation requires that we really make systemic change in an execution environment. That means as we're continuously adapting and enhancing our system, we have to navigate the seams of issues that we see across these similar but different policies. Now, we often hear about transforming the grid from a one-way pipe to a multi-directional network. And what really does that mean? The grid modernization that PG has been working towards really walks the path of 5 main components: infrastructure, communications, automation, technology management systems, and integrated operations. And we're going to continue to lead the way down that path of grid modernization with the development of our virtual power plant, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, it looks like there are about 70 to 80 people on the call today. We lost maybe a couple, maybe between 60 and 70. I would venture a guess that if we each said, hey, let's write down our definition of a virtual power plant, we would have about 60 to 70 definitions of a virtual power plant. And Ryan teed us up saying, hey, we're going to define it this way. For the context of this conversation at PGE, this is how we've defined our virtual power plant: the orchestration of distributed energy resources and flexible loads through technology platforms to provide grid and power operations services. And we can further break that down into customer programs, which is really about flexible load, and the DERs that help support that flexibility. So distributed solar, distributed thermal, distributed storage, and also utility scale storage. Then there's the information and operational technologies and platforms that are necessary to provide that coordination. Brenda talked a little bit about that today. At PGE today, our virtual power plant has about 225 megawatts that are capable of providing one or more grid services. And that's really how we think about the VPP internally, is about what grid services can provide, notwithstanding the customer experience that goes along with that. But at 225 megawatts capable of providing one or more grid services, there's actually a lot more latent flexibility on the system, and it's growing every single day. We actually were talking a little bit about this beforehand, but latent flexibility is a phrase that I heard from Jigar Shah, who's the director of the DOE Loan Programs Office. And he was talking about this during an episode of the Energy Transition Show. It's a podcast, and it was on VPPs in early May. Highly recommend taking a look at that or taking a listen to that. He likens customers choosing to participate in a VPP to them being able to kind of turn a dial. And the basic premise here is that customers are buying electric vehicles because they want to drive electric vehicles, and they're installing smart thermostats because they want to be able to control the temperature of the house from their phone, not because they want to be part of a virtual power plant. And it's that latent flexibility, those resources that are on the system that can be unlocked by the virtual power plant if we provide the system integration and the mechanisms, both the financial mechanisms and the regulatory mechanisms that encourage customers to kind of turn up that dial for participation. Now, importantly, policy and regulation are really strong enablers of the effective and affordable deployment of virtual power plants. And thinking about this audience, there's really two key areas where NARUC and regulation and policy can help. We've touched on them in the prior conversations, but to put a fine point on it, the first one is really supporting open source technology frameworks and uniform interconnection standards. Lots in the news in the recent weeks about Tesla and GM and Ford adopting the Tesla standard, and what does that mean for scaling deployment. One of our desired outcomes is the creation of an open source framework that can be readily deployed by anyone, utilities, aggregators, technology vendors. The availability of that code and the uniform standards that go along with it really enables faster implementation, and it reduces costs when integrating with multiple application programming interfaces, or those APIs that were mentioned earlier. The second area where this audience can really help is in supporting business models that enable the recognition of the value created by the additional services that are unlocked by VPPs. Allocation of dollars is always an area that generates a lot of discussion, for sure. But what I'm suggesting here is that our conversation about cost allocation needs to be informed by the value of grid services being provided. And we have to recognize that the value of those grid services changes based on the conditions of the system. The annual averages for long-term planning, fixed prices, they don't reflect operational realities. And the other side of that same coin is that most customers don't want to be energy day traders. So I'm definitely not suggesting real-time dynamic pricing is the solution. But we need to strike that balance so that customers can make good choices, so they can choose where they set their VPP dial, and they can change that dial based on their needs at the time. So I'll start on this slide just by saying that my friends in the communications and marketing departments hate it, absolutely hate this slide. And our engineers and our operators absolutely love it. Now, for this audience, I'll just highlight that the system that keeps our drinks cold and our showers hot is pretty complex. And managing that complexity, it's what we do every day. It's our role, it's why we come to work today, and we love it. We're not afraid of it, we fully respect it, and we understand that the vast majority of the people we serve don't care one bit about this complexity. The transformation we're in the midst of really requires flying this plane while we're rebuilding it, and we're 100% up to that challenge. I'll also note that as you look at this slide, nowhere on it do you see the phrase virtual power plant. That's because everything you see here is the virtual power plant. It's very real, and it's how we operate our distribution system every day. I mentioned earlier the 5 main components of grid modernization, and this is where we can really see them all coming together. Our distribution lines and substations provide the physical infrastructure that's necessary to power between generation and load. All the blue, red, and yellow dots that you see represent the communications channels that are carrying that ever-increasing amount of data to our customers. It's coming from everything from streaming devices, if you're watching The Mandalorian, to manufacturing the nanoscale microchips that make it possible for us to even have this discussion today. And that data is really a foundational component of the grid. The automation and sensing that's being built into everything, it's being built into utility systems, it's being built into buildings, it's being built into individual devices. It's what provides the visibility to the real-time state of technologies that's required to balance a real-time system like the energy grid. So having that foundation, that data is foundational, but it's really the ability to manage it that's essential. And that's where these technology management systems, like the energy and outage management systems that we're likely familiar with, and the newer and more complex advanced distribution management systems and distributed energy resource and demand management, demand response management systems really play a central role that you see in the middle. And there's not going to be one system that rules them all. The ability to integrate and operate those systems to provide grid services is really the reason for the aptly, if not super creatively named, Integrated Operations Center. This is really a physical manifestation of our virtual power plant, and it's a place you can visit and see exactly how we do this every day. So up till now, I've really provided a very utility-centric frame for the discussion, and that's been intentional by design. It's how we talk about the VPP internally, and we have to talk about it that way so we make sure that we're building the capabilities that are necessary to maintain the system integrity. But this is about customers, and customers couldn't care less about voltage regulation. They don't care about contingency reserves. They don't care about energy schedules. They do care about what those grid services provide in terms of power quality and keeping costs in check. So what we're really doing here is creating a clean energy ecosystem in which everybody can participate and that they can thrive as well. Now, customers are engaging through technology that's in their pocket, and we have to be there to meet their expectations. We have to participate with them in the way they want to participate. We've got to translate all of that internal utility-centric capability into experiences where customers have more choice and they have more control of the energy that powers their home, their work, their life, and their communities. I mentioned that dial earlier, and we really want customers to be able to turn their dials up to 11 and crank it up there as much as possible. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to talk with you today. Looking forward to the ongoing conversation, the continuous learning. I'll say thank you and turn it back over to Commissioner Fraser.
Thank you, Franco. Appreciated hearing PGE's perspective and the inside-outside dynamic, and appreciated the focus on what customers care about. So we're going to open it up for questions, and why don't I start off with one for all three of our panelists. So each of you spoke about the customer perspective and ensuring that benefits flow to the customers who are lending their resources to the system. What should a regulator be looking for in a proposal for a VPP from a regulated utility to ensure that happens? What questions should we be asking about that? And who wants to start first?
Maybe I'll jump in as someone from a regulated utility. I think asking about how does the benefit flow to customers, and what service is being provided to those customers? How are you analyzing that? How are you assessing that? I think the other thing that keeps coming to my mind is that flexibility. We have very much come from a world of a static rate. We're starting to move into time of use, a little bit of differentiation there. But even that, if it's static over many years, the system is changing so fast, and the participation of customers is changing so fast. Flexibility in how those rate structures are applied is going to be really important going forward.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is, another important question to ask from a regulatory standpoint is the value of the VPP being maximized? I think when we've thought about traditional demand response, it's typically had one use case. You're clipping the top peak hours to provide a capacity benefit. But now with VPPs and being able to manage load in a lot of different ways, it means we have the potential to provide a lot of different benefits to the power system. Avoided renewables curtailments in the middle of the day, deferred investment in transmission and distribution capacity where there are significant local grid constraints. And because VPPs are distributed at, as I was saying in my presentation, at kind of the customer edge of the grid, they have the potential to provide a lot of those different benefits and potentially to even stack two or more of those benefit streams as something that's coming from one resource. That's not easy to do. There are really sort of critical challenges associated with dispatching the VPP in a way that provides those different benefits, but it's an opportunity that we haven't had previously. And so asking, is the VPP being used in a way that maximizes its potential value to the system is an important question when it comes to making sure that value is then available to the consumers and participants.
Yeah, I was going to really focus on, we can think about it from that capacity side, but to kind of echo what Ryan was saying about trying to capture other values of that stack would be, how could this program also allow more flexible ways to kind of engage those customers for multiple services? So are there flexible ways to kind of configure the structure so that you could capture more locational value as well as the more broader capacity value, thinking about it from a power plant to a more distribution use case? So being able to evaluate some of those aspects as well.
Thank you all for your responses. We have a question for Ryan. Your analysis assumed that the DERs in the VPP already are built. All right, just give me 1 minute. And there's no investment needed in the DERs themselves. Did the analysis factor into the possibility that a DER was already participating in a program like demand response? At what point would you need to assume investment in additional incremental DER to support VPPs? I hope that was clear.
I think I understand the question, and it kind of goes back to Franco's quoting of Jigger Shaw, and kind of in terms of referring to the latent potential. I think a benefit or one of the real kind of the interesting value proposition of VPPs is the fact that there is all of this investment that's already been made in technology that's sitting on the customer side of the meter that we aren't fully utilizing, right? Customers are buying smart thermostats because they look good and they want to control them from their phone. Customers are buying electric vehicles because they're clean, the acceleration's awesome, reasons X, Y, and Z. So the investment has already been made by the consumer for a variety of reasons that don't have to do anything with energy. And we now have the opportunity to basically give the customers, to unlock an additional feature of that investment that the customers have already made by participating in a VPP. So what we are modeling is exactly what the commenter was describing. We are looking at the potential for adoption of these technologies as our starting point, and then saying, how much value can we extract from that, while accounting for the fact that not every customer will want to participate, and there will be limits on our ability to manage the customer's end use. So that is our starting point. I think from an accounting standpoint, it would be important to make sure that if we're assigning value to a VPP, we aren't double counting benefits that are already associated with a demand response program. But I think from the standpoint of our analysis, we weren't trying to answer that question. We were just saying, if customers have organically adopted these technologies, what's the value that we can extract from that as a VPP?
Thank you for that, Ryan. Brenda, how do you enable customers to opt out of providing a service? For example, are there penalties, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for all of our control events, we have varying logic depending on the technology and how folks may want to set up that program. So the parameters will vary. You could allow customers to already have their own schedule set up, or have certain preferences where they would just automatically be opted out and not be asked to participate during certain circumstances. Or there could be more traditional examples where you're going to have an event, and then about an hour before that event or a day before, they'll get an email, they'll get a text message, they can click the link, they can choose to opt out actively as well. And there's just different forms of it depending on the technology. We try to be more careful. If it's an EV, you don't want to accidentally, unintentionally not allow someone to charge their car before they have to go to work the next day. And so we try to handle it with a certain amount of nuance, but we always allow the customer and the program manager, operator to set things up to allow those customers to have that opportunity first. And definitely it's all consensual, and they all agree to it.
Thank you for that, Brenda. Franco, question for you. You show the complexity of the system on one of the slides. It might have been the inside one. How might AI capabilities impact the system? Can it help reduce costs or increase available capacity?
I take myself off mute. Thanks for that question. I saw it in the chat. I was like, ooh, I hope we get to answer that one. That one looks good. I think AI technology in general is incredibly fascinating. And I think that the way that we're talking about managing the distribution system and managing the energy flows, the real-time energy flows, is not going to be a human-centered process. It is going to be algorithm-driven. Those algorithms are going to have machine learning embedded in them. In addition, the AI technology is not just in that real time, it's in the ability to disaggregate loads. We're doing some work now with Utilicast and NVIDIA to look at how might we use systems on a chip to be able to understand better what those energy flows are. All of that is machine learning AI enabled. All of that requires a huge amount of data transfer capability, as well as data analysis. And so it's going to be core. It is already core to how we manage the system, and it's only going to exponentially get more complicated. So this is a plug for the jobs of the future related to the energy industry. Computer scientists, data analysts, data scientists. Those are the folks that we really need to get excited about this work. It's very different than it's still important mechanical aspects of the system. But AI is going to be 100% embedded into everything that we do. And I know that there's that caveat around there that it's going to destroy humanity. We got to be smart about how we incorporate it into everything that we do.
I can chime in and just say, well, first, I always say please and thank you when I talk to ChatGPT, because you never know. But in all seriousness, though, with AI too, I think there's still a lot of opportunity when you're thinking about just the optimization problem that we're thinking about. There are so many different factors. When I was talking about how can you predict what you're going to get, and you now have this hugely scaling infinite number of possibilities, I think AI has huge potential to help us really be intelligent and optimized so that folks will feel confident about what they can get as well, right? So far, though, on our end, we are very careful, and security is first and foremost. So we have a machine learning team in the R&D side, but on anything that is open, we're just observing what the technology looks like, and then we'll see where it goes. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for the intelligence and optimization for VPPs.
Thank you both for that. So we have a question for all three of you. We've come at this largely from the perspective of regulated utilities, but are VPPs only applicable when utilities are involved and managing them? Can a utility customer, for example, a large energy user, utilize a virtual power plant without their utility having a program to facilitate that?
Yeah, I think the short answer for me is, I think FERC Order 2222 is and other initiatives to open the wholesale markets up to demand side participation are designed in part so that customers have that access to the market. A very large customer could participate directly in wholesale markets to bid their load in ways that would provide additional value, or aggregators in wholesale markets are available to customers and give them that avenue for participating. So I think that the very short answer to the question is no. I think in a lot of ways, utilities are very well positioned to be key actors in this space because they have visibility across all parts of the system, from the distribution system up to the generators. But they are by no means the only entity that is able to provide this sort of a service to customers, and then on the other side to the power system.
Yeah, I'd echo that and just say that as the distribution system operator, we want to make sure that customers are getting the high power quality as affordably as possible, as much clean energy as possible. And to the extent that we partner with others, like today we partner with energy service suppliers, third parties to manage our participation in the wholesale markets to make sure that we're meeting demand every second of every day. We see partnerships as a key aspect of our ability to operate the distribution system as a virtual power plant. So I agree with Ryan. Hey, we're very well positioned. We do this every day, and we want to be that operator. And we recognize that AI is not our core business. So rather than build that up from scratch, we want to partner with the right entities to be able to bring that capability so what customers feel is a seamless experience.
Brenda, anything to add?
Sorry, this is related to the, I think that if it's I think that there's always opportunity for the customer to optimize. I was trying to find the question to make sure I fully understood what they're saying. So they're asking if it will always be the utility that has the value for VPP versus could they kind of go off in other ways? And I think that we've already seen folks that the utility is already capturing some of the value from their customers are ready to participate in wholesale markets. And I think that there will always be opportunities for those folks to become more optimized in a more self-sufficient container. But in terms of kind of to echo what Franco is saying, the visibility and understanding the grid constraints, unless there are ways that they could be getting more clear localized market signals, maybe that's a little bit further down the road in a more transactive world, but less so today.
Thank you, Brenda. Trying to see if we can squeeze in another question here. Let's see, just give me a sec. This one looks like it's addressed to Ryan. You argued for an expansive definition of VPPs, for example, to include energy efficiency. How can a utility or aggregator include the benefits of EE in a VPP?
I mean, one way to think about it is certain resources like, maybe smart thermostats are good at providing capacity, demand reductions on a limited event basis. A smart thermostat also can provide energy efficiency, by helping customers program their cooling use in a way that sort of reduces their overall energy demand. Smart thermostats have both an energy efficiency and a demand response benefit. I think we sometimes lose sight of that when we try and create silos in our approach to evaluating VPPs and thinking of them as only a demand response resource or only an energy efficiency resource. If you do that, you're kind of splitting the benefits of the thermostat in two, but still assigning kind of the whole cost when evaluating either of those services on their own. So if we think about a VPP kind of more holistically in terms of the benefits that it can provide to the system and include energy efficiency in that, then that's aligned with what I was saying earlier about needing to be comprehensive in our view of value. It's also another way to think about it is if you're developing this resource, you might need capacity or you might need energy, kind of the base load versus peaking issue. And if you package energy efficiency, it can give you some of that base load resource that you wouldn't be getting from something that's only going to give you peaking capacity. So in my view, I mean, it's very jurisdiction specific, but if you're a jurisdiction that has a greater need for energy than capacity, then a VPP that includes energy efficiency is going to be better aligned with your needs in those circumstances.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Franco. This has been a really informative discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope the audience did too. I'm sure they did. Really fascinating deep dive into VPPs. So thank you again. And let me turn this over to Jeff.
Thank you, Commissioner Fraser. That was really outstanding. I agree. All the questions, we received a tremendous number of questions, which we really appreciate. We're sorry we couldn't get to all of them. I've checked, and we're going to try to get some of those answered as part of the summary briefing that we will be preparing based on this recording and based on the presentations from the panelists. So we hope you'll look for that, and panelists, I hope you don't mind being voluntold that you'll help us get some answers to those questions that came in. I know you were watching them, so I really appreciate that. There's some good detailed questions there that I think are better addressed in writing. So thank you to everybody. This is probably not the last you'll hear on virtual power plants from us at NARUC. It's obviously sort of a critical piece of the energy transition. So keep an eye out for more content on this to come. And again, thank you to all the panelists. Thanks again to Rod Sobin and Nazio for joining us in this as well. And we look forward to seeing you in other venues. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everybody.